Okay, so it looks like we have just about everybody. We may have a few stragglers, but we'll just get started, I think. So welcome everyone to the second meeting about the Carnegie Park and Ride and Station Improvement Project. Instead of doing kind of traditional introductions, I'm going to ask you all to type in your name, your organization, and or your affiliation, with Carnegie into the chat box so we have a kind of record of everybody who's here. And then basically the agenda tonight is going to be pretty similar to the last meeting. If you were able to attend that, we're going to have a presentation about the project, and then we'll do a kind of a moderated question and answer session after that. If you do have questions that come up during the presentation, if you could just type those into the chat box as well, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session. And just so everybody knows, this meeting is being recorded, and we'll be posting it on the Carnegie Station website like the last meeting, so that if people aren't able to attend, they can still catch up and see the designs. So with that, I'm going to start by, just in case there are some people who weren't able to join us last time, I'm just going to give a very brief overview of our Transit-Oriented Communities program at the Port Authority. So James, also I'm not sure if I had introduced myself. I'm Maura. I am the Transit-Oriented Communities Project Manager at the Port Authority. And we have a number of Port Authority staff on here on the call joining us today, including Breen Massiotra, who's the Transit-Oriented Communities Manager, or Manager of Transit-Oriented Communities, and a number of other folks from our staff. So thanks for joining us tonight. Okay, so James, if you could start, thank you. So the Transit-Oriented Communities program plays several roles in encouraging transit-oriented development in Allegheny County. TOD is dense, it's development that's mixed use, it's walkable, and of course, it's close to high quality transit. Next slide. So our TOC program consists of several program areas, including the creation of the TOD guidelines. These were created to provide stakeholders with best practices for doing transit-oriented development. So they're meant to guide planning decisions around transit and serve as a reference. TOD zoning, we've worked with local municipalities, including Carnegie, to produce resources for how to kind of adapt municipal zoning codes to better encourage TOD. We have a first and last mile program, which provides support and advocacy for projects that help connect people to transit via other modes, such as biking and walking. Our station improvement program is how we plan for upgrades to our current stations and promote ridership and transit access. And then finally, joint development. Next slide. Joint development the Port Authority can play three major roles in supporting TOD in Allegheny County. So the first is as a sponsor for joint development on our property. The second is as a stakeholder for any development that occurs within the zone of influence of current or future stations, which means the half-mile radius or walkshed around that station. And then finally, we can be advocates for sustainable land use decisions along all of Pittsburgh's transit corridors. Next slide. And that's just a super, super brief overview of everything that we do. If you want to find out more information and find out all about the projects we're working on, please visit our website by visiting the projects and programs page of the Port Authority site and then clicking on Transit-Oriented Communities. Next slide. And then finally, this is the project website for the Carnegie Station and Park and Ride project. This is where you'll find all of our past meeting recordings, slideshows, and you can also give feedback via comment box. As I said, this meeting will be posted there as well as the slideshow, so you can reference that for people who weren't able to attend. And then just some brief context on the Park and Ride project. So this started when the Port Authority secured a congestion mitigation and air quality improvement program, or CMAQ funding, to help pay for the planning and construction of a new parking garage at this Park and Ride site. The existing parking lot is in high demand in normal times. And there was a 2010 West Busway TOD assessment and plan that called for a new parking garage on the site of the park and ride lot. This plan also recommended transoriented development at the site that could be mixed use. So our planning project, presents an opportunity for the Port Authority to partner with a developer to do TOD on a portion of the site and build a park and ride garage to accommodate 200 more spaces. Building the garage gives us a chance to reconfigure the site and to better connect both the park and ride and Carnegie Station to downtown Carnegie. So at the last meeting, you saw two different scenarios that we were considering for this conceptual design. So tonight we'll be showing the final scenario that was selected, as well as the 10% conceptual design of that scenario. I'd like to acknowledge our project team, many of who are here tonight with us from GAI, Evolve, and Breen Associates. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rich and James from GAI to start the presentation off.
Thanks, Maura, and thank you everyone for being able to attend our public meeting tonight. We're excited to show you the final concept for the Carnegie Station Park and Ride. Just to kind of summarize the items that we'll be covering today. So we're going to go over some public feedback and summarize what we heard from you at the last meeting, as well as the survey that was conducted online as well. We will then go into the final concept master plan that we developed based on your feedback, as well as feedback from the Port Authority themselves. Through that, we were able to develop some renderings and perspectives to kind of prepare you so you can see what that site could potentially look like in the future once it goes into engineering in the next phase. We also prepared some 10% conceptual design as well that goes into the next phase as well. So thinking about things as landscaping and green infrastructure projects that will be a part of this project. And then we'll summarize the overall concept and then give you all an understanding of the statement of cost and our next steps for the project itself. And I'll pass it over back to Moira to go over the public feedback.
Yeah, thank you. So this slide shows some of the major themes we heard at last month's public meeting, which was exactly a month ago on August 24th. We heard a lot of great feedback from the community and residents and other stakeholders. So this slide just shows, some of the things we heard and how we're addressing them in this concept and beyond. So some of these points are addressed through this design concept that we're presenting tonight. Some are more policy level issues that the Port Authority is still exploring, and some will be addressed in a future design phase. And many of these are kind of a combination of all three or just two of those options. So the first thing we heard was about improved site access, both pedestrian and vehicular. So working within the constraints of the current site, this design you'll see tonight does feature safe and wide pathways, including some other ways to, some new ways to access the site within a vehicle, as well as an improved kind of drop-off area. We're also supporting Carnegie Borough at every chance we can to convert the rail line in front of this site into a bike trail. So hoping to help them with their efforts to expand the Panhandle Trail up through this site, which will make the site much more accessible by bike. Another one we heard about was building scale. So the design that we're proposing is not proposed to exceed the heights that are currently allowed through Carnegie's existing zoning code. In fact, the garage that we're proposing tonight is slightly lower than the height of the adjacent borough building. So pedestrian safety and comfort. Again, the design does feature safe and wide pathways to move people throughout the site. It also features more public space as well as covered waiting areas. So this has a lot more pedestrian amenities in the design than currently exist on the site. And of course, more details to come in a future design phase. We heard questions about the interim use of the site before TOD is developed on the site. So this one is one of those policy kind of decisions that has to be made about the interim use of Port Authority property in all locations. This does occur at other park and rides that have special kind of agreements in place, and this could be explored further here. Parking structure operations, we heard questions about paid parking as well as shared parking opportunities. This is another policy issue that we're having ongoing conversations about at the authority as it goes for parking paying for parking at our park and ride sites. So again, still kind of exploring options there. Then we heard a lot about sustainable design. So the general placement of green infrastructure will be suggested in this concept, but details on kind of like the exact amount of stormwater storage needed and other technical details will come in the future design phase. Things like solar panels and electric charging placement, those are going to be determined by the project budget as well as just future design. And then finally, we heard questions about increased traffic volumes on surrounding streets. And an increase in parking at the site will undoubtedly produce more trips and cars on the road around the site. The phased approach you're going to see tonight does feature initially 2 entrances to the site for vehicles. The second phase will direct most traffic to an entrance at West Main and 3rd. So that was kind of a summary of what we heard. And with that, I will pass it back to James to present the concept.
Thanks. So as Moira brought up, the last time we met, we were able to show you 2 different scenarios, and through the public feedback and through the TOD, the TOC at the Port Authority, we were able to determine that scenario 2 was the best option for Carnegie Station. So here we're highlighting phase 1 of that scenario, which is a standalone garage structure directly adjacent to the borough building, moving the operations of the bus turnaround loop and layover facilities to the back of the site and promoting potential future TOD space to the front at West Main to try to create a continuous street frontage along West Main all the way from the borough building to the station itself. With this phase, as we call it, phase 1, we do have the garage entry from Veterans Way with an entry and exit point also coming out of at Logan Street. At this time, before that, we can take into consideration a potential phase 2, which would be to have access to West Main directly from the 3rd Street access point. Our garage in this scenario does contain about 430 parking spaces. And then there's an additional 9 spaces of parking for ADA at the drop-off loop that would be held at the rear of the site at Logan Street. TOD that would be able to work within this space is about a 4 to 5 story structure that fits within current zoning standards and hitting at about 70,000 square feet that we could look for potential mixed use facilities for retail, commercial, and then residential on the upper floors. We would like to promote the potential of a pedestrian bridge to connect between the garage itself and its future TOD, just providing an additional amenity and also a covered feature to allow people to use the garage to then access the inbound and outbound platform stations with as much cover as possible, creating a sense of comfort and weather protection. The bus loop, as mentioned a little earlier, we had moved it to the back of the site, kind of concealing some of those operations from your main street. This bus turnaround area can contain a minimum of 10 60-foot articulated buses with a maximum reaching of about 15 when you mix 60 and 40-foot 60-foot articulated buses and 40-foot city buses. The infrastructure we're also kind of highlighting that would be emphasized here would be potential future electric charging stations for the buses themselves within that internal island and their driver comfort facilities, which would be highlighted in that central island as well within that loop. So that would be facilities such as break rooms or restrooms for the drivers themselves. Kind of calling out some of those specific things just to kind of pinpoint where those all are on the screen. So the ADA parking, as you can see, is as a one-way entry point from Logan and then exit back onto Logan. It's about 90 lineal feet for this drop-off area, providing maximum use of vehicles in that. Again, highlighting the potential for 10 to 15 feet or 10 to 15 bus layover spaces within the internal loop itself, and the driver comfort facilities and future charging stations that could be contained within the central island. A concrete barrier would be, which is currently existing, would be reoriented to direct traffic of the buses to lead back into that internal loop. So that would be your type of concrete or jersey barrier that you would typically see. We're adding a lot of vegetation to the site overall, as it currently is just a surface parking lot for the most part. But we are adding vegetated buffers around the roads themselves as well as along sidewalks, and those play into scenario 2. phase two of this scenario. The garage itself has the access and entry and exit point from Logan Street. It does have an internal speed ramp, which is directly to the back, which allows for each individual deck of the parking structure to be a flat deck. This will help the overall aesthetic from West Main Street and allow for potential kind of concealing that it is a parking garage overall. The primary access point, which is existing today, will remain in place along Veterans Way, so you have access directly into the garage from that location, but you will exit from the Logan Street point. A loading zone for the future TOD would be also included with access within the garage itself, providing those services for the TOD structure. A pedestrian bridge, as highlighted, would be that potential connection point, also making it appear as though the garage and the TOD are a continuous structure along West Main. And then we're hopeful for the future rail to trail conversion that would allow even better access for people biking or walking to and from the station and from the downtown all the way to Carnegie. And then highlighting phase two of this scenario, which is mainly the connection point to the garage, to 3rd Street access and the bus turnaround loop as well, having that access as well. This provides an additional entry and exit point for all vehicles, so buses and the users of the park and ride. This has minimal infrastructure changes to accomplish this phase. We would be able to do this through minimal curb enhancements and then mainly striping within the overall garage itself, with the addition of some internal circulation movement changes, and those would be highlighted through striping as well as signage and internal gate systems. Then this garage, obviously, as we have to structure a new lane of travel for the buses to move throughout the garage, would decrease the amount of parking spaces within the ground floor only to about 400. It would take the overall garage to about 405 spaces. As it is designed in the conceptual phase, we have marked the total garage with parking spaces at 10 feet wide by 20 feet. And moving forward into it, you can actually decrease the width of those and contain more parking, which would be acceptable as low as 8.5 feet by 20-foot spaces. And then future TOD loading zone changes will also have to happen in this area as well. So the services for those, the future TOD would just be kind of reoriented as well. And then highlighting some of those points that we just went over. So the entry point at Logan Street would just be realigned, but you would be able to still have access from there as well as Veterans Way. That would go unchanged. The loading dock area for access to the future TOD would overall be changed just to kind of realign that and allow for the bus lanes to have access through the garage. Including some of those changes are the internal gate systems, just to make sure that no user of the park and ride have access or drive into the bus loop by any sort of accident, using this internal gate system as well as wayfinding signage internally. And then also showing that we would have stop signs for garage users to promote the ability for buses to come in and out pretty at ease. The 3rd Street access point is the biggest addition here. So this allows you to have a much easier access and much easier way to find yourself to the station area and the parking ride. So this would be used for the buses and the park and ride users. And this would come with several pedestrian crossing and smart signals at the intersection itself. So that would be several enhancements that would be able to happen there. Some views that we had shared in the previous meeting for the public hasn't changed too much, but we did just want to highlight those again. So looking back from West Main at the intersection at 2nd, looking at the possibilities of public plaza and the architecture types that we could consider for the structures themselves. So view A, again, looking at the intersection from 2nd, looking back towards the garage area itself, we wanted to try to enhance the overall aesthetic of the garage and potentially the TOD that would be there to highlight features and textures that are already existing within Carnegie itself through brick, while also trying to modernize it by adding curtain walls of glass and steel that would be able to help enhance the overall aesthetics of the site. So trying to tie it in as well as modernize the structure itself. You can also kind of see where the pedestrian bridge would tie in around the second floor of the garage, just connecting those two structures and allowing for an amenity of potential future residents that could live there, as well as creating coverage for those using the park and ride garage to get to the station area. You can also see that in the back of the garage itself, you can see the top of the existing borough building. So highlighting that the garage itself would be shorter than the overall clock tower, which sits a little higher than 60 feet. So the garage itself at its max height would be about 55 feet. So we can see how that would fit and tie in. Well, while the TOD could potentially go up to 5 stories, hitting that maximum of 60 feet. What we also wanted to highlight in this perspective rendering is just the rail to trail conversion that could take place here. A nice wide path for cyclists and pedestrians to walk on, as well as some public space enhancements that we'd like to include within the future TOD that would come as well. So creating sort of that overall aesthetic and placement making that we're looking to have here along West Main. And then looking kind of on the operations side of things, you can see that we're going to look from Logan Street back at the bus loop turnaround and the back end of the garage. So what you can see here again is that overall loop access that is concealed by the TOD and the garage itself. It's nicely contained. It is elongated from what is currently out there now to allow for additional buses to take use of those layover facilities. And then also the charging stations and the comfort facilities for the bus drivers and staff to have contained all within that internal island. Again, you can kind of see here how the borough building does still peek out over top of the garage itself, highlighting that height difference there. And then just thinking about additional features that would be added, such as lighting and sidewalks that would be improved as part of this project. And then we went and moved into the 10-phase development. So an example of that we wanted to show for this presentation is the overall landscaping plan. What we're trying to do here is take some of the impervious surface that's out there, so the asphalt and the concrete that's currently existing on site, and break that up and add some additional vegetation in places where we could also consider areas for rain gardens or bioswales to be included to enhance and add to that green infrastructure component to the overall site. So those elements might be adjacent to the garage themselves. We have a nice large vegetated buffer that can exist there. We would be able to fit a decent sized swell that would be able to capture some rainwater runoff that would come from the overall site to try and mitigate that stormwater. Other activities that might need to happen would be some underground detention systems as well. Just as this is an urban area, we would need to make sure that we're containing as much stormwater runoff as possible. Some plantings that we wanted to kind of incorporate into the overall site are some of the ones that we've done at other stations that we have done this sort of level of master planning for to date. But we wanted to create aesthetically pleasing, but also maintenance-free vegetation to have within the site. So looking at how we can have street trees and area trees to create some nice canopy and shade, as well as some shrubs and decorative grasses that would be able to be in there while keeping it sort of a shorter plant schedule list. We didn't want to add too much, so we're doing more in massings and clumpings to create that overall visual effect. And then some lower lying herbaceous plants that would add some general color and aesthetically pleasing to the beds that would be able to be incorporated through here. And then just to kind of summarize all of the items that would be within this. So phase 1, which is the option of the garage before 3rd Street access, including the bus turnaround area where the ADA parking is, we're hitting a total of 434 parking spaces, surpassing that 415 number that we have in our CMAQ grant. So that's very positive for this. And then even when we go into phase 2, when we reduce the amount of parking spaces within the garage by potentially adding that 3rd Street connection, we are down to 416 overall site parking spaces, still surpassing that goal of 415 in the CMAQ grant. Bike parking facilities, as the rail trail conversion happens, this will be very important, and we want to make sure to incorporate as many as possible, with a minimum probably of hitting about 80, thinking about different ways that we can store and house cyclists that would then be able to use the Carnegie Station to go further on into the system. Again, mentioned earlier, but the pickup and drop off, the lineal feet is about 90 lineal feet, allowing for several cars to park within that area. To allow people to have a very quick, short walk to the platforms themselves, less than a minute travel, but from the drop-off area to the platforms, creating a nicer transition from the car to the bus. Bus layover spaces were, again, hitting between 10 and 15, 10 at minimum. Vehicular access points, 3 to 4, as we look at the access points of Veterans Way, Logan Street, and then eventually as well as 3rd Street access. And then some nice numbers to also pay attention to is the active frontage. As we look at TOD, we're opening that area up for at least 330 lineal feet of active frontage that could be contained in the site, which is longer than the garage. So creating a 52% active frontage now along West Main Street, which would be greatly enhancing that overall usage as the current, more than the current site is now. And with that, I will pass it off to Rich to kind of go over the statement of cost.
Thanks, James. The cost of the conceptually designed project amounts to about $11.1 million. This considers full build out of both phases 1 and 2 that James had shown. And this is for a basic level of construction with a conventional garage. It does not include, for example, engineering, demolition, or contingencies. The proposed budget for the project as shown includes the $6.5 million CMAQ grant, plus the matching funds from state transit and other government sources totaling the $13 million. So the remaining $1.9 million, it does allow for construction of the project. That was our main goal here, to confirm that. But it does, however, limit the ability to construct any premium sort of features such as architectural facade components, or to accommodate infrastructure needs for possibly converting the garage to another use in the future, such as residential or office space. Next slide. So here's the timeline. We did share this with those of you who attended the first meeting, and here we are, step 6 in presenting our second round of community engagement. And we are wrapping up all of our planning documents, and we are getting ready to package those to engineering. Coordinating with those folks, it looks like moving forward, there are some uncertainties such as geotechnical conditions, utilities, permitting, and possibly right of way. But the FTA funding will be available to begin design in March of 2021. So if all goes well, design could possibly be completed by the end of 2022, with construction commencing in 2023. So with that, that concludes our presentation today. Thank you all once again for coming out, and would like to open it up for questions. The instructions are presented here on the screen, and you can use the chat window or raise your hand.
Yeah, thanks guys. So we have 2 questions in the chat box. The first is about the architectural style of the new garage, and basically, you know, saying that the facade doesn't seem to fit very well with the borough's traditional architecture. And then Heath provides a link to some photos that I checked out of just some prominent buildings in Carnegie. So I think those are really helpful reference photos to have for the next phase of design. I think, you know, seems like the brick was kind of the unifying thing with our design, but I can totally understand that comment. So yeah, I think that those are great reference images for us to use going forward. Thank you. Lenny says, would love to get involved with the conversion of the railroad to an extension of the trail. Does anybody have any information on how to get involved in this? So right now, I definitely would like to give Steve the borough manager the opportunity to comment on that if you want to.
Sure. Thank you, Maura. I would just say that for anybody who's interested in assisting us, we are still in the process as well as trying to connect with the Port Authority for the Rails to Trails program. So Lenny, I can always reach out to you to provide any information on what the community or residents or business owners can do to assist us with that.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so the next question in the chat is, what would the expected timeline between phase 1 and 2 be? So that's kind of a big TBD. Kind of a lot of things depend on the level of interest from a developer to build something on the site. So the idea is that the phase 2 would come after, with an actual development on the site. And so it kind of just depends on when we can find somebody who's interested in partnering with us to do development there. We did, as part of this process, issue a request for letters of interest to the development community just to kind of gauge their interest in development at this site. And we received a couple and had a few kind of preliminary conversations with people who might be interested at some point, but there's no clear kind of timeline on, between when the garage would be built and when when that second phase might be built. So then, I don't know, let's see, what's the next question? Is there any case where phase 1 and 2 might be essentially combined into the same build phase if the Main Street access became available earlier? Is it limited by the rail tracks? So yes, that is, well, and also that's of course another big factor in the previous question as well. Yes, that West Main access is limited by the rail tracks right now, and it's dependent on the railroad becoming the bike trail. So that's another big obstacle in addition to the kind of development interest, which would be, as soon as we can sort of help the borough facilitate that conversion, we could talk about phase 2, but I don't think anything could really happen until the railroad question is answered. And then, I don't know, Breen, did you want to add anything to that, or?
No, I think you covered it. I think it might be helpful to make the distinction between what is contingent on the trail and what is contingent on development. So I'm just going to reiterate that just to make sure we all understand. So what we showed in terms of drawings in phase 1 and phase 2 were really focused on access points. And phase 1 would be limited access because the railroad is there today, and it would be based on existing conditions. And phase 2 would, in terms of infrastructure, would allow us then to cross what is currently railroad tracks because it would be a multi-use path or similar. And that, of course, the path conversion is really in the hands of the borough. We are fully supportive as Port Authority because there are many benefits to us as well, to our riders. But we are, looking to the borough and the county to lead that effort. And then in terms of development, the garage is, again, as we discussed here, fully funded in terms of federal grant funds and Port Authority matching funds when our capital budget allows. And the development piece will follow that. There is not a fixed time frame for when that will occur. We look at a number of factors that might include, when is the right time in terms of, the construction of the garage, when is the right time in terms of the real estate market, when is the right time in terms of the capacity that our staff has to manage that project. So that will be determined, but it's not going to sit on a shelf for a long period of time. we now have this plan, and we want to see this plan through as a team that works on TOD. So it's just a matter of some of those sort of factors in terms of prioritization in our short-term work plan.
Awesome, thank you. The next question regarding vehicular access, is there an opportunity for an access point at 5th or 6th Street as well as 3rd? Would that be helpful? I'm gonna ask either James or Rich if you wanted to tackle that one.
Sure, Maura. If you go back to the map, the 3rd Street access seemed to make sense here. Number one, 3rd Street is more of a major street as far as the north-south movements, south of the stream area and the station area. And it really bisects the site nicely as far as tying into the garage and then leaving sufficient space for the authority vehicles to complete their operations and turning maneuvers. So I don't believe more than one connection would be warranted. And we certainly wouldn't want to disrupt the operations of the Port Authority's buses themselves. So we stuck with the 3rd Street entrance to move forward with the concept.
Thank you. Next question. I realize that the landscaping plan is not finalized at this stage, but will there be any consideration for utilizing native trees and herbaceous plants in the final designs? James, I don't know if you're the landscape expert.
Yeah, so yeah, it's not finalized now. What we have prepared is things that are on the approved Pittsburgh tree list. But anything that would be finalized in the final plans could, we'll review those later as well if there are other things that would be preferred. And as we go into engineering and design, I think that those would be panned out a bit more. So yes, I think that is possible.
Great, thank you. Next question is, how is pedestrian access handled across Mansfield Boulevard? I may have missed, is bridge access useful or no?
I can respond to that if you like.
Yeah, please.
So a couple of things. So I've, as you might recall from the last meeting, I don't think we went into detail about it in this meeting, but we did look at access to the site as part of this study and identified, and we have pretty detailed information that we didn't, that is available, will be available in the final report, and things that we didn't go into in the meeting, but we've identified lots of opportunities for improving access to the site, and that includes the intersection, that includes Mansfield, West Main, Jefferson. That's a difficult area. And we also know, and a lot of our work here in this project was built on a 2010 study for TOD along the West Busway that included looking at the Carnegie area, and called for narrowing the West Main Mansfield corridor in that area to shorten the pedestrian crossing and make the road safer for pedestrians. So that's something we did not in this project design outside of Port Authority's property. That's a PennDOT road. But we do think that there is an opportunity to improve pedestrian safety at that intersection. We're Port Authority and my team were interested in working with the borough and PennDOT to implement those kinds of improvements. I wouldn't, we don't generally advocate for bridges. They're very expensive, and they create an incentive for people to drive faster. So they're expensive to build. They're difficult to make accessible for people of all abilities. And when you remove the pedestrians from crossing the street, then it will only become more of a highway and give people an incentive to speed. So, so we're really interested in, again, how to make those crossings feel safer, feel shorter, make the street feel like less of a highway and more of a main street. And we're willing to definitely actively interested in working with the borough and PennDOT to do that.
Great, thank you. Next question. Has there been any discussion of eminent domain to gain access from 3rd Street? So we have not had any conversations about using eminent domain to do that. You know, I'm not really sure if the borough is thinking about that, or if Steve wants to make a comment there about those kinds of considerations. But as far as we're concerned, we're not, you know, pursuing that to gain access to the site.
And Maura, just to answer your question as well, that is not something that we have looked at this point as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, so 5th and 6th would be on the other side of the borough building. Correct, yes.
That's correct, Maura, and thank you, Keith, for clarifying. 5th and 6th access points obviously would be outside of the Port Authority's property, which our team did not consider designs for, but you do raise some good ideas that could perhaps be pursued by others.
Great, yeah, and then Keith just clarifying. So then the next question, will there still be pedestrian access at Jefferson Street? It's hard for me to remember on this map where Jefferson Street is, but I don't know, Rich, can you comment on that?
Sure, yes, there would still be access from Jefferson Street. We don't propose making any changes at that intersection at this time, considering it as a PennDOT roadway. However, we do hope to improve connections to the station area platforms from the signalized intersection itself.
Jefferson Street is at the far bottom right there.
Yep.
Okay, right. Yes, thank you.
Right now, there's a series of switchbacks to access the station for ADA purposes. It makes it a little bit of a longer walk. There's a longer pass, so we're going to try to evaluate making some grade changes in the area to have a more direct connection for everybody.
Just to be sort of super clear, just to reinforce what was said, we would not be removing any access points to the station, only trying to add more as we go here with this project.
Yes, thank you. So I don't see any. So Steve did put his contact information in the chat for people interested in finding out more about the Rails to Trails initiative. So definitely contact him if you'd like to get involved or have any more questions about that. I'm not seeing any other questions right now in the chat box, but if anybody has anything else, feel free to raise your hand. I can talk about kind of next steps for the project if there are no other questions. So basically this final product that we are working on here will be wrapped up at the end of October, and that we'll have our final kind of report then, which we'll of course post on the website. At that point, it will then get handed off to engineering to continue the design process. And as Rich noted, you know, we don't expect to really have the funding from the FTA to begin that until about March of 2021 at the very, very earliest. And so, you know, the timeline's still pretty uncertain for completion of design and construction, but probably not, you know, construction at the very, very earliest, probably not till 2023 is what we're kind of being really very tentatively told. So that's kind of our timeline and next steps. We do have another question here. Does PennDOT anticipate increased ridership with the development? I'm not sure if I understand that question.
Or I could take a shot at this one.
Sure. Yeah.
At this point, PennDOT hasn't done any studies for the development, but as the individual TOD sections are completed, they would likely submit their own traffic study to PennDOT considering there is a connection to a state road. If not, the overall site. And then there could be short addendums for each use as it goes in. But likely any sort of development that would go on site would submit a report to PennDOT for review.
Thank you. Okay, another question. So what are the plans for when construction starts? I'm guessing Carnegie Station will be closed for 2 years. So as far as the plan for, construction and phasing and things like that, we don't, the details of that will definitely be, will come later during the construction drawing phase of the project. So we don't really have much detail on what that will look like. In terms of the closure of the station, I mean, I think we definitely want the station itself to still be operational during construction, and we would figure out a way to, configure construction around that to make that possible. I think that the main goal, without having many details on how, physically we would do it, the goal is to have the site be as functional as possible during construction. So I don't think it would ever be completely and totally closed, but of course, some of the spaces might go away temporarily. It just kind of depends on the construction phasing and how that all shakes out during design. Okay, another question. Are there plans to include stormwater, permeable paving for open areas and sidewalks? James, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I would say that I can't speak for engineering as this moves into the next phase of development, but it's always an option for best practices for green infrastructure uses. So those could be things that they'll take into consideration when running their stormwater calculations as to how to remove the stormwater from the site as quickly as possible and to be able to contain it as well. So I would say that that'll probably be something they would look at, but it also depends on cost as well, because when you use permeable paving, it could always increase that cost. But I would say it will be reviewed in engineering.
Yeah, thank you. Another question, out of curiosity, has there been any traffic studies done to see how Logan and the connecting streets would handle the increase in traffic? Rich, that's your...
Yeah, we haven't done any formal traffic studies. Obviously, Logan Street itself, it's posted for no trucks, no heavy vehicles. However, it is constrained right away. We are interested in better sidewalks, improve traffic flow, but you can only do so much with the cartway that's provided. Therefore, our designs do look to provide some of those features, such as better sidewalks within the Port Authority's side of the street. The main access is signed for Veterans Way, so we do anticipate most of the traffic entering because it does become one way into the site when you get east of the Borough building. Obviously, most of that traffic would be alleviated with the 3rd Street connection, which again relies on several other things to take place. But as far as any formal study, there hasn't been anything completed.
Thank you. What will the exact sources of the matching fund? What will be the exact sources of the matching funds? Breen, I might kick that one to you.
Yeah. They will come out of our capital budget, which is primarily state funds matched by local funds. So all the state money that we get is required to be matched by local funds that we get from the county. So it will be that typical combination, which funds the majority of our capital budget.
Great, thank you. Right. Well, don't see any more questions. I can give people a few more minutes, but yeah, this has been really great. I feel like we've had some really good community participation in these meetings, despite them being online. So thank you to everybody who took the time to participate this evening. We, as I said, will post all of this information on the project website, and I will share a link to the website as well as the recording and slideshow with everybody who is on our email list. And so, yeah, please feel free to pass that along to any, residents, neighbors, friends you think might be interested in the project. And yeah, if there's really nothing else, I think we can probably call it a night. So thanks again to everybody. And we will be in touch with more information, with all this information soon.
Thank you all.